To get started, Shannon is going to help me tonight. We're going to go through it together. We've got a few slides, but this is going to be very interactive. We have some photos that we're going to share. We want to talk today about things that can prevent us from moving forward with a sale. I think we had an awesome July. We just had a record-breaking July, in fact. And that's because most of the brokers at Best Choice Realty have a plan for handling some of those surprises that pop up. And so when Candace and Shannon and I and Virginia were talking about what topic do we want to talk about tonight, we thought, what better way than to educate everybody at Best Choice? And for those that are listening on YouTube after, these are some tips and tricks that we can use to make that closing process go a lot more smoothly. So we're going to talk about the surprises and being prepared tonight. And we do have some photos that I'm sure some of you might laugh about, but these are real life scenarios that we're going to talk about. Yeah. Let's go to the next slide, Shannon.
Well, and I think before we get into that too, I think a lot of people think you might have started a very smooth transaction. It does not mean it will end smooth. So for those that have a first transaction, it usually all of the things that we talk about, things hitting fans, that usually will happen at the 11th hour, the day of closing, during the final walkthrough, things like that. So we've got some ideas. We got some things certainly we can share, but these are very real scenarios recent in the last 30 days. So here's one that's right on the screen. I'll just read the text message and we can have a quick little combo about it. So this one says, the buyers have suddenly discovered an issue on the final walkthrough today after waiving their inspection. It appears that the fridge started leaking the last couple of days. We're set to close on Wednesday. Any advice? So I can't remember who responded to this, but it says attempt to correct it or issue a credit, maybe offer up a home warranty. Just because they did not have an inspection doesn't mean the appliances that were working don't have to work prior to closing. That's actually what the final walkthrough is for. So so it sounds to me like they answered the question. Just because you waived your inspection doesn't mean that things that have changed shouldn't be addressed at the last minute.
Yeah. Just because you're a real estate agent means you have a duty, whether you work in Washington, Oregon, or Idaho, it doesn't matter. You have a duty to make sure that your buyers are properly taken care of and you've had some communication with that other agent. So items like refrigerators, washers, dryers,
damage.
I had one time where they backed into the garage. They had a kind of a moving party. And one of the moving trucks backed into the garage and put this big dent. And so similar type of thing, just like this, where the refrigerator started leaking, I had to take care of that garage door and I was representing the buyer. So what did I do? I certainly wanted to talk with the listing agent right away. We did have to do an extension. We did have to get their insurance involved, and that took some time. So there's a lot of moving parts when something like this happens, but the first thing you want to do is obviously contact the other agent and have a conversation and see if that's under warranty or if there's an insurance claim that we have to make.
Or if there's already a plan in place to fix. In some cases, we had one where there was a scratch, like the stagers had scratched these beautiful Brazilian floors on their way out, and the seller had already had plans to fix the floors before. So just having a conversation can sometimes at least make things a little bit smoother in terms of the process of transitioning and moving plans.
When I see this though, Shannon, I think thank goodness that this agent did an inspection or did a kind of a walkthrough before closing. I think that's where you could run into problems is if you're like, you've had smooth transaction, then all of a sudden you didn't do a walkthrough and then you find out after the day of closing and there's nothing we can do.
It doesn't look so good when you're the buyer's agent and you just sold a house that immediately has latent defects. Yeah. So I guess learn from some agents' mistakes. Do the final walkthrough. It's the one thing that you should never miss, should never forget to do. Always have that scheduled and on the calendar.
And if somebody says, well, I'm not going to be in town, then do it for them. Walk
Yeah.
through the house for them. I do that with all my clients. I know
Do a
Hannah, you
video
do too.
walkthrough. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. So here's another fun little scenario. Sellers left junk in the house. Yeah. Also, if you're curious, sellers agreed to send a junk company to the property to take care of the junk. Worked out, lesson learned. So, and I think I've got visuals for this one. This one's fun.
Yep.
So imagine you go to the final walkthrough and you see this in the kitchen and this outside.
I don't know if they're really quite ready.
I don't know if they're ready to close today when you're seeing these types of, you literally have
We had the
dogs.
pups too.
There's dogs still in the garage. I don't think they're quite ready. So the part of the reason why you do your final walkthrough is to kind of take a look at things like this. You know, you're looking for, did the repairs get completed that we asked for on the inspection responses? Were those things were those things done? If there was a re-inspect, bring the same inspector through to kind of take a look at the things that came in called out during the inspection. But one of the other things too is also making sure that it's in the same condition that when you purchase it, certainly, but then also that the seller's ready. Because if the seller doesn't look ready, you're not going to close. Or if you do close, your buyers are walking into
A situation.
they're walking into quite a situation. Yeah. So,
So what do we do to fix this one?
this particular situation was tricky because the seller said, oh yeah, we'll clean before closing. Yes, we're going to be moving out. We've got movers scheduled to go. Now, everybody's definition of clean is different. So when they say they cleaned, they probably swept the floors, but did they really clean in the cabinets and in the appliances? No. So these buyers that ended up walking into the house when they bought their house walked into a mess. They can't move in quite yet. They can't get their stuff in the refrigerator because they still have to clean it. So this matter was resolved by having the buyer's agent pay for a professional cleaner to come in. The listing agent had to chip in because shame on them. They should have had it cleaned before they transferred ownership and transferred keys.
Please tell me the dogs got taken care of.
Of course, the dogs got taken care of. Nobody left their dogs. They were not left homeless.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but no, that's everybody's chipping in, and it doesn't have to be that way. If you're the type of person or you're dealing with a client who is very much like attentive to the details, and I've had people like that, the contract, and this goes for Washington, Idaho, and Oregon, it's not specific. It means kind of broom swept. That's kind of the expectation. So if you're kind of you're working with a fussy buyer, you may want to, in the inspection negotiation or when you write the contract, make it very specific about what you need. And so maybe you are asking for closing costs and you're asking for a professional cleaner. You know, if you're working with a house like this where there's a lot of stuff, you may want to ask them for that. I used to, back in the day when we could negotiate, it was a buyer's market. I used to ask for the carpet sometimes to be cleaned, you know, when there was a lot more carpet those days in the 90s and the
Before
early
the
2000s.
LVT.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying, seller to please hire a licensed professional cleaner to clean and provide a receipt to buyers at closing. That would be something like this where we could have prevented having to share the costs. That would be something understood above and beyond. And if you are going to write that in, it would have to be in an addendum or in Washington, the 22D other section. If you are being more specific about the cleanliness of the walkthrough, and you might want to do it 3 days before closing. Seller to please hire a professional cleaner to clean the house, you know,
Yeah.
inside, including cupboards and kitchens and things like that. I mean, you can be as specific as you want. Also be careful though, because if you're in a multiple offer situation, they're not going to choose you.
Yeah.
So
One of the best things you can do as a real estate agent, if you're new especially, is have a cleaner in your back pocket.
Yes.
Because I mean, having someone that you can send all of your business to, you trust them, you vetted them, you know how they're going to be cleaning. You will use them on every transaction. And it is a service that every seller will absolutely love and every buyer will certainly appreciate. And it'll prevent some of these awkward situations with possession.
We have some with the best choice too. I
Yeah.
mean, we have some of our agents who are licensed and also run cleaning businesses. I know I ran into one this morning. So if you do have a need like that, just put it out there on the chat and I'm sure somebody will pick up that opportunity and help you. Let's go to the next.
Oh, yeah, this can happen. So this one's kind of fun. This is a screenshot from a buyer's agent. I think it's a buyer's agent. It says, my client has not returned my calls, texts regarding the items. I told him how important it is that it gets taken care of. I'm having difficulties with him. Frankly, I'm a little concerned. Just a heads up, most likely there will be a closing delay. Let's talk tomorrow. And I think really what happens here is that there's just like there's no sense of urgency on the other side, or they're ghosting you. I had one I talked to this morning where they're dealing with an inspection response and the other side is just sitting on their hands. They're not picking up the phone, they're not answering the text messages, they're not answering the emails. It's like, are they motivated to sell this house? Help me help you. So yeah, there is a little bit of this that happens. So what would you do in this scenario, Rochelle? You got a buyer's agent or a listing agent on the other side that is just not responding.
So number one, we're supposed to be working together cooperatively. And that's the number one thing you need to remember when you're working with another agent on the other side and they're with a different company. Hopefully that doesn't happen within Best Choice. We are a very big family now. And so it's nice to keep it in the family, but most of the time, actually, we have to work with a co-op agent, a cooperative agent, and co-op meaning cooperative. So let's actually work cooperatively. If for some reason that other agent on the other side does not respond or is not returning their text, like in this case right here, is not taking care of the matter, you have the right to look up that broker's information and get the broker involved. I always give people the benefit of the doubt. If I'm trying to reach somebody and they're ghosting me, I let the ghosting happen overnight, as
Yeah.
ghosts would do, right? They can ghost me overnight. But by the next day, if it's a time sensitive matter like a closing delay or an inspection response or things like that that are really time sensitive, there's nothing wrong with you calling the other broker and say, I've tried to reach your broker for the last 24 hours. Is there another way to reach that person? I'm trying to get a response on an extension, or I'm trying to get, you know, basically an addendum that needs to be responded to. Let that broker do their job and get with their other broker. It's funny how things get sorted out when you you go up the ladder a little bit on
I
some of
know.
these.
So if you're encountering a Casper, hopefully Casper will respond to you after you know after a good night's rest and whatnot. But if you're having that situation, yes, look up their designated broker. If you need some help with that, call us. We can help you, direct you. Sometimes we can help too,
Yeah.
and come from a different angle, and try and get a response that can help sometimes too. Always give the benefit of the doubt though. I mean, we've had buyer's agents that wanted to submit an offer on a property and the listing agent's not responding. Listing agent's not responding. What do I do? What do I do?
Are you
And
talking about the one that died?
yeah, the listing agent literally had died and the seller didn't know that their agent had passed away. So, you know, we always look for the best of in people, and we are a very cooperative MLS and you know, agency in general. We want to work well with the other party. Give it 24 hours. If they're still not responding, give us a call and we can see if we
Or
can
just, you know,
check in.
change your approach. Sometimes the way we use our words, or that we can infer a lot, sometimes with text messages, try a different approach. They are required, again, anything in writing has to be responded to. And again, within reason, time is of the essence is the language that we use in both contracts, or all three contracts, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. So try to communicate in that format, especially if it's time sensitive, and try to avoid less texting when it's time sensitive or things that you have to get a response on. I find a lot of people are using way too much texting.
Yeah.
And then they say they're ghosting them. And it's like, okay, let's look at the situation. And maybe we need to take something that's time sensitive, put it into an addendum so it forces their hand into presenting that solution or that strategy or that extension.
Yeah.
And we go at it a different way. And then the ghosting stops.
Right, right. It's like 2 or 3 sentences max on text messages. Anything more than that should be an email.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Verbiage to include on inspection responses. So we get questions from this, like, how should I phrase it? We have a whole class about how to prepare inspection responses and what you can do and how to take a 90-page document in your inspection response and condense it down to 2 bullet points, you know. So if you need some help on that, stay tuned for some of those trainings. But I think some of the key things we wanted to talk about was licensed, bonded, and insured. Why is this important, Rochelle? Why do we want licensed, bonded, and insured people?
Because if you have to go after closing and you have to deal with a matter after closing, if they're not licensed, bonded, and insured, they're not held to the same standards. And then they bring you into the mix, and then you have to get involved after close of escrow. If you're dealing with handyman, and as much as I love my handyman, I don't use them for some of the bigger projects or the ones that are very costly. We want to use licensed, bonded, and insured. Even our handyman is licensed, bonded, and insured. So,
Right.
so yes, to avoid problems after the close of escrow, that's one of the reasons. And also because your clients are getting, most of the time, not all the time, they're getting much better quality of services rendered on that property. So you're getting somebody that has some standards, versus somebody that's just, doesn't have a license, they're not held accountable.
Well, I mean, look at it from, we want to be ethical and transfer ownership and be able to sleep at night. So we don't feel like we have to Casper other people. But, if things are done properly and we have, let's say, a plumber that goes out and assesses a leak, don't you want someone that knows how to remedy the situations rather than just Joe the buddy that, I think he knows how to plumb. I think he did. It gives you that sense of trust of this was done properly.
So you
We're
want to
not
use,
gonna have it happen
when
again.
you're writing the verbiage though, I think a lot of people are like, I'm stuck, I don't know what to say. You just simply write, seller to please hire a licensed, bonded, and insured electrician. I just helped somebody this morning write one up. To replace the panel, the electrical panel, and provide a receipt 5 days prior to closing to the buyer. That's it.
Yeah.
So you got to ask who's going to do it. We want it licensed, bond, insured most of the time. If you do not say licensed, bond, and insured, then the seller or the homeowner infers that they're the one that's going to do the work. So that could be, I've had crawl space
My buddy
repair.
Joe, that could be the seller themselves, so
Yeah.
the buyer certainly wants to make sure that the work was done properly.
So big ticket items, always make sure roofing, siding, insulation, HVAC, licensed, bond, and insured,
Yeah.
HVAC specialist, licensed, bond, and insured roofer, whatever the case may be. And then make sure that you add in that language that you like the receipts. I think that's the biggest takeaway that we're seeing a lot more is people are wanting receipts or proof before closing. And if you write that into your inspection response or into your purchase and sale agreement, they're required to provide that. If they don't provide the receipts, then you don't know how much they paid. You don't know if they were licensed, bond, insured. You can't really verify that. But the only language you could stand on is licensed, bond, insured. I mean, if they were not licensed, bond, insured, then you may have a claim after closing. But that's why I would suggest go ahead and add some additional language like providing receipts or an invoice at 5 days prior to closing. So you know that that work order has been done.
And that gives you time to 5 days prior to closing is the way, at least in Washington. I don't know what the final walkthrough is for Idaho. I think it's the same thing, but 5 days prior to closing is when you're doing your final walkthroughs as well. So ideally, before you go for your final walkthrough, you want to know that the work has already been done. So if the work hasn't been done, then we shouldn't be closing. And we probably need to delay and talk about some sort of extension. But, having the receipts done before you do your final walkthrough means that you're basically
It
verifying.
holds
that
everybody
it's done.
accountable.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, let's go to the next.
Okay. Extensions, and we can just kind of tackle this one by one. So we're getting a lot of questions about extensions, a lot of negotiation around extensions right now. Hitting a closing date, it seems to be like hitting a target, where we're getting close sometimes, but sometimes it's a little bit harder to hit the bullseye. So in a balanced market like we're in right now, we're talking a lot about buyer rate lock extensions. Can you explain to everybody what a rate lock extension is?
It
But
could cost something. So if you
Yeah.
have, like in this situation where you have all that stuff in the house, the pictures that we were looking at with the dogs and everything. And let's say we had to go to get an extension from that seller. We represented the buyer in that instance, where the seller's got dogs and all kinds of outdoor furniture. They're not quite moved out. And we have a lock that's going to be expiring because we locked several months ago and we know that the rate needs to be extended. If we go to the seller and say, hey, the cause of the delay, I mean, this is not how I'd say it, but basically that you have a lot to do with your moving plans. However, my buyer still needs to get the loan. And if we have to extend past, 2 weeks so you can find a home for your dogs and find a place for all your stuff, we're going to have to do a rate lock. If I was locked in at say 6.5, and now the rates went up to 7. So in order to lock, to get an extension on my lock, it's going to cost X, Y, or Z. You'll need to find out from the lender how much the lock extension would be so that you can properly negotiate that with the seller who essentially breached the closing date. And we're working with them to try to get the extension.
So I think the key on these ones is making sure if you're a buyer's agent, I sure hope you're working with a vetted lender that you like and have approved and is a preferred lender and you work with, and they're someone that will answer the phone call, because having those types of conversations at the 11th hour, which is usually when this happens, that they'll able to answer those types of questions about rate lock extensions and what that looks like for you guys.
Yep.
PITI comes up. So PITI is principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. So when we have a buyer that wants to extend, let's say the lender didn't make their closing date, on the 31st of July, no, I need a 1 week extension. So what happens in that situation? Well, in many cases, the seller says, well, I mean, no, I'm not just going to extend a week just because you say you need a week. We gave you 30 days already. So usually in that situation, in a balanced market like we are, the sellers basically want to see a per diem amount. Now, what does that amount look like? At a minimum, they're usually looking at a PITI per diem extension. So if they're paying their principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, if it's $3,000 a month and there's 30 days in a month, obviously that $3,000 breaks down to be about, $100 a day,
Yeah,
we want to
pretty much
basically
is.
make it down to that. So at a minimum, it could be more, it could be less, that is in essence what people can negotiate for that per diem extension. Escrow will help out with that when you get to that point as well. Anything else you wanted to add about that one?
A lot of people get, Rochelle, what do you, I've done a lot of real estate transactions. I've managed a lot. I've brokered a lot. And you shouldn't lean into the per diem. You've got to look at the situation a little bit more holistically. Like, what is the seller's situation? What's their moving plans? What's the communication been like throughout the duration of the transaction? If somebody's needing a few days extension, let's try to give them that flexibility if we can. But if we're not, and the seller's already moved and performed and did all the right things, and then the buyer's just delayed and there has been no communication, then yeah, they're certainly willing to negotiate for the PITI because the seller has been harmed at that point in time. They've done everything right, and the buyer has maybe not performed, or the lender has not performed, or dropped a few balls.
Let's say they're on their third extension.
It's like, the first extension is a little bit like, let's work it out, a couple days, I get it. But by the second extension, then we start talking about earnest money becoming non-refundable. I've helped many of you do that type of language building into the extension. And then by the third, that's where people start going, in order for me to extend another week, we may be having to buy an extension. And that's what we mean when we buy the extension, is we may help out with the PITI in order to keep the deal together. So we don't have to go back to the drawing board, and we can get the seller to agree to the extension that we are desiring to keep the lender and the buyer and the agents all in agreement with the extension. So again, a lot of negotiation happens right now when it comes to the PITI. And then the last two bullet points
rent
are
backs.
definitely
Yeah, so seller,
too.
I think I meant buyer, seller and buyer rent backs per diem after the date. So if the buyer needs to occupy early or the seller needs to occupy later, what does that work like? Yes, there is a form for that. In Washington, there is. I think, is there one for Idaho? I'm not sure.
There is, yeah.
There is one for there too. Of course there is. So there's in essence an agreement that needs to be signed, 65A, 65B for Washington contracts. What I tell people is, I sure hope you're not just putting in a 0 and just hoping and praying everybody. I mean, we hope everybody's going to be honest and have good ethics and, and actually move out when the day they have. But what happens if,
But
right?
we in our business, Shannon, we work with worst case scenario.
Right.
You kind of want to think about worst case scenario with this type of thing. And rent backs would be if you were to talk to any attorney in the state of Washington, and I know Idaho is that way now too. They would highly discourage you from doing a rent back.
Yeah.
Has it been done? Yes. But the parties have to agree on some sort of mutual understanding on, number one, why do we need the rent back? Right? What's the situation?
How long is it for?
How long, and what's the compensation?
How much does it cost? Yeah.
Yeah.
These rent back agreements that are drafted, that we have as, forms for us to use as real estate agents, they're not intended to be 6-month agreements. These are not rental agreements that are in place for landlord tenant laws. These are intended to be very, very short term, 30 days or less. Like, they're not meant to be long term. We're not attorneys. We can't speak to what happens if, someone doesn't meet the terms that are on the rental agreement that's on the rent back. But I would sure hope that you've got something that says it's for this term, after which shall be, and you have some sort of dollar amount per day for each time that someone in essence is delaying the term.
So in the situation that we showed you, the pictures with the dogs and all of the stuff, let's just pretend that that was a situation where we already had the moving truck there. We had signed papers, seller had signed papers, but they, obviously everybody wanted to close, and the seller needed a few more days, or a week in this case. Let's just say that a week, they needed a week to get their movers to come out and actually help them move everything out. We would have to negotiate. I mean, in real practical sense, we would be negotiating a 65A or a 65B for that situation, to help that situation. And there better be some fundamentals written into that contract just to protect. And then obviously some costs, because we'd have the mover that has to hold our stuff and the buyers in a truck for a period of a week.
Right.
And an Airbnb we'd probably have to get for a week. So there's a lot of moving parts. And unfortunately, you guys, when the closing date passes, then our duties have changed.
We're limited on what we can do.
We become more of the customer service department, the customer service line.
Yeah.
1-800 number that people call. That's what we
The
become.
AI bot that you guys reach out to. I mean, we're limited on what we can do at that point.
So you really want to be careful if you're going to negotiate a 65A or B. It would be best to probably call us, call me, call Shannon, call Candace, call Virginia, call one of us to help you with that negotiation, because we've done a lot more and seen a lot of challenging situations over the years when it comes to those types of things.
Attorneys would prefer that we just extend. I mean, that's in essence what they deal with, the nasty nasties, right? The stuff that is like worst case scenarios when it gets to attorneys, right? So they would love to see just extensions where the parties have moved out, we exchange hands and, move forward. The rent backs, though, it can be a solution where you're like, oh, shoot, we need an extra day. The sellers need the funds in order to pay for their moving truck, and obviously the question that kind of happens usually is cleaning comes up a lot when you're dealing with rent backs, because the sellers haven't moved out, or, things like that. So just keep that in mind when you're dealing with rent backs.
Insurance too also comes up.
Make
sure that, if anything, it's double covered. You've got the insurance from the new purchaser, and then you've got the seller who also keeps the insurance on the place. So just make sure that you've covered the insurance. I've seen somebody on a rent back ask for a copy of the insurance. I thought that was a great idea. Why not get a copy of that?
And then the last thing I have on here is this. It is a solution. I'd say this is not the end all be all. I would much rather see extensions or have some sort of rent back in place, but we have seen some agents where, gosh, we just need a garage. I just move the stuff out of a truck into the garage. Like, we don't need it in the house. Like, just move it into the garage. There is a way to do that. There is language to use when you're doing that. So don't just put seller to have access to a garage or buyer to have access to a garage. There is some language that we definitely need to include, and insurance is really the big issue that we need to address, because what happened, we deal with the what ifs. What happens if the house burns down, and all of that buyer's belongings just burn down along with the house, who is responsible for the insurance in that situation? That's why there's a paragraph of language we would use in that scenario.
Okay.
Okay, cool. I think that's everything that we had. We had some questions and comments in the chat. If you have something you want to add in, throw it in there and I'll just read through them. I'm just going to go start from the top, and we can get going from there. So let's see here. Oh. I know. I have an assistant to a listing broker. Yeah. Crossouts can be a nightmare after. Yep, definitely.
Crossouts require initials by both parties. So it's an amendment. It's not a counteroffer most of the times when those things happen. So 22Y, for example, I send over a 22Y extension in Washington, and then they cross off that they don't want the PITI. Maybe they want your earnest money. Again, if we cross off using the same document, it requires an initial, and then it also requires an initial with a new proposal. If you want to be lazy and just stay on the same document, some of the agents that are not with Best Choice, they do that. Just make sure that everybody's in agreement to the crossouts in Washington.
Mutually signed. It's got to be mutually signed. Thanks, Stephen, for piping in. Yeah, so where does it read in the contract for Washington for final walkthroughs, the number of days? Yeah, and he's absolutely right. There's a term in the Form 21 for residential purchase and sale, where it talks about closing and possession. You're absolutely right. Nicely done, Stephen.
The easy one to remember. I hope they don't change this in Washington, because it's Section F. When we get to that point where the closing it's F.
Like we're failing and flunking.
We're failing.
We have to reference Section
so I
F.
remember that.
F.
Section F.
Yeah.
I get a good kick out of that one.
Yeah. Okay. And then some cases for rate locks, extensions can be very expensive. Yeah. I mean,
Candace, what's the most expensive rate lock you've seen?
That was last year and it was close to $6,000. That
Yeah,
was to extend the rate lock that had already been extended.
ouch.
and it was a good lock, if I remember right. It was a really,
Yeah, it was a really good lock. And then the product, I mean, they could barely even change over to the next product because rates had changed and things
Mhm.
were happening. So the cost to get it the second time around was pretty costly.
Yeah.
But we did get the seller to pay.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
good.
Yeah, and landlord tenant laws can be tricky. That's why we rental agreements versus rent back agreements, they are different things. So thanks, Stephen, for piping in for that. Speaking of a cleaner, yeah. Yep,
I'm
Guy,
sending one.
we're all needing cleaners right now. Yep. And then
Yeah.
how long is a typical rate lock?
It
Um,
depends on the lender and
yeah.
it depends on the loan. So you'll need to talk with your lender on that. So when you start the process, that might be a good question to ask your lender or the buyer's lender, just, how long is the rate lock good for? Maybe the buyer forgets to ask that, but you as their agent, it's good to know that, it's especially going into a difficult transaction, or if you're having some difficulties along the way, with ghosting and negotiations during inspections, and you feel like you may need an extension early on in the transaction, you might
Yeah.
want to ask the lender when the rate lock expires.
Yeah, and this stuff happens at the last minute. I mean, 1 out of 4 transactions will fail. I mean, that is a statistic we don't love, but it is a fact. So how can we prevent that 25% of the time? It's by paying attention to the different things we talked about tonight. So, is there anything else you wanted to cover? I think that's basically it.
Questions?
Any other questions
Candace?
from the group?
Candace, I think you brought a lot of these slides, I think, or the forward.
Yes,
Anything.
yes.
Is there something else that we didn't cover that needs to be covered?
Well, I think always too, even when you're representing a seller, just kind of discussing the final walkthrough and ensuring that our sellers are also doing their part too is helpful to keeping these deals together.
Mhm.
So, I had a scenario where my seller, then unbeknownst to me, decided she was going to go and take and change all the fixtures, all the lighting fixtures with some basic ones right before the final walkthrough. And I had no idea. So it's kind of too, just reminding your sellers the expectations prior to closing. They're going to do a final walkthrough and just setting those expectations too. Both your sellers as well. So
Perfect.
that's the only thing that I would add.
Okay, well, that's a good tip. That will save you a lot of time. I think that would have saved me a refrigerator in the garage at one time, Candace.
That's right, exactly.
Well, you start to
Or
remember some of these painful experiences, and I don't want you guys to learn from those experiences. But yeah, I did have one, like, I should have told the seller, you know what, that refrigerator in the garage stays with the property because it says
yeah,
refrigerators in the contract.
right, exactly. But it's on the truck all the way halfway down to Oregon.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah.
like,
Oh,
And I had to
okay,
go,
right. So
I'm
yeah.
going to Home Depot to get myself a refrigerator to put in that house. Yeah, I would be very happy
And
to remember to
I
do.
love the idea of having your cleaners just on speed dial. Sometimes that's just a gift that I offer up for my buyers. And sometimes for my sellers. If we know up front their situation is challenging, they're not going to be there, or, they're tight for money, just having that as a back pocket tool is, I mean, it's perfection. It's
yeah.
perfection. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I've had a few sellers where I just said, you know what? I know you're leaving. You've got a lot going on. Go ahead and leave. Part of my service is going to have a cleaner come. So you just move, get out, go ahead and move,
It's
and
worth
we'll
it.
deal
And
with the
deal with it.
cleaners, right? We'll deal with
I
the
love that.
cleaners. And, it just makes a win-win across the board. So,
Yeah. Well, typically too, I will, this is like a final ad, I suppose, is we try not to have closings on Fridays. I think there is something to be said about having a closing on a Wednesday, just because it gives you time. If you need a couple extra days for an extension, I mean, you've still got some wiggle room in that day before the weekend.
Good tip, Shannon.
Most sellers, they move on weekends. So, if we can kind of get things arranged on Wednesdays, it does give you some extra time and extra wiggle room. The
Well,
other,
then the funds come in too.
yeah, that's true. The seller gets their funds before the weekend, like
Yeah.
this
Yes.
makes for a much more smooth situation.
And what's funny, Shannon, we control that date.
Yeah,
We put it on the contract, and I don't know why we're putting on Fridays. Like,
I know.
just because we're in a habit, maybe, or
I
because
don't
we want to get paid on Friday. I don't know. We don't get paid on
No,
Fridays.
we
though.
don't. Yeah.
So
Can I
Yeah.
share a nightmare experience about me
Sure.
deciding to do something on a Friday?
Share
Go
away.
The seller decided not to leave because they didn't have their funds because escrow sent them out after the Fed wire cutoff on that Friday, and so the seller decided to occupy the property through the weekend. And the
Oh.
buyers were trying to move in. Had it been on even a Thursday, we could have handled it before the weekend started.
Yeah.
Hmm
there you go, Stephen.
Yep.
You got you echo
You
Shannon on
take
that.
it on a Wednesday. It's much better. It's much better. Yeah, I know. So
And I echo that in the contract negotiation classes. So if you've not been in the contract negotiation class, you will know that that's a goal, is not to have any closings on Friday. I'll
Yeah.
go with Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, but preferably not Friday.
Well, and two, I think in some respects, 5 o'clock on a Wednesday. I mean, there's nothing you can negotiate. You can still talk to people.
Yeah.
5 o'clock on a Friday. I mean, escrow's checked out. They're done. Like nobody's doing anything at Friday at 5 o'clock. They're gone.
Over.
So,
Yeah.
it gives you more time to actually make adjustments on that day. End of the month is also kind of something to avoid. I mean, people like to close at the end of the month because of when their rental terms and things like that are. But if you can avoid it and close the week before or the week after,
your service is so much better.
escrow experience there. I mean, think about how many people they have to sign and fund at the end of the month because everybody wants to close at the end of the month. You're just one piece of paper on a giant stack of closings. So if you can, if you've got some flexibility there, I mean, that's always something to keep in mind too.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's everything we had for tonight. So thanks for hanging out with us. Hopefully this was helpful for you guys. It's a quick 30 minutes. It goes by fast. Stay tuned. We do have a couple masterminds going on this month. I know we're meeting in person in Puyallup this week and in Steilacoom, Tacoma area next week. We also have a it's like a distressed situation. Yours truly, not me, but this person, our fearless leader, Rochelle, is going over distressed properties. These are cropping up again. They're coming up. I'm not saying they're coming in droves like it were in 2008, 2009, but they are coming up and we want you guys all to be well equipped for those types of scenarios. Rochelle's done thousands of them. So
it's just a power hour giving you the basics.
Yeah.
Again, if you want to take it further, there's obviously more classes and more certifications you can do.
Right.
But I'll give you guys the basics that you need to know.
Right. So that'll be this Thursday, just 1 hour. So if you are interested in, your clients are interested in HUD homes, Fannie Mae's, bankruptcies, short sales, foreclosures, anything like that, you'll want to tune in this Thursday for that training. So stay tuned. We'll talk to you soon. If not, we'll see you this next Monday or at one of the masterminds this week.
Okay, have a good one.
Thanks, you guys.